go. The basic goal is just to kind of wade through the way that I see it, rightly or wrongly, is that Paul has a really massive and really comprehensive and really brilliant argument all throughout his letters. Specifically, we'll look at mostly Galatians and I think Colossians today. But in order to kind of piece together, I think, what Paul is on about in a way that's helpful for us, one, understanding where he was and what he was doing, but two, understanding how it relates to where we are. There's just several different elements that I feel like are helpful to understand. And some of those today are, of course, Paul contrasts and talks a lot about what it's like to live according to the flesh and living according to the spirit. And of course, the old man, that the old self, the old man that died with Christ, and the new man, the new creation that is raised with Christ, etc. So we know he uses all this language. So it's always been an effort in my reading to try and understand how it kind of fits together. And I hope that maybe some of what we hit on today will kind of start to see how some of it fits together. I think none of this will be new, and that's where I think it'll be helpful, and that all of us can give our thoughts as to your reading of some of these passages, because we've all 1,000 times. The goal is just to see them, and if it's a slightly different angle, or just see them slightly differently. I will say that as I was putting these notes together, I had all sorts of revelations. As it happens, you read something so many times, but then you read it through a different lens and a different angle, and it just reads completely differently. And that's always wonderful when that happens. So I had that happen quite a number of times. So I hope that maybe that will shine through for all of us. But so bottom line is, we want to talk a bit about worldviews, and a bit about culture, and a bit about, as Paul talks about, kind of the levels at which we find ourselves in a way stuck or mired in this will that opposes God. We've been using the words yetzer hara, or the old self, or Paul is going to use the self that lives according to the flesh, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to kind of look at some of the levels at which that plays out, because I think that's part of Paul's argument, because of course he's going to tell us that this whole thing has been undone. So it's going to be really helpful for us to kind of be aware of like what exactly has been undone. And I think there's several levels to it, and I think that will help us for where we are in our world and culture and everything as well. So let's just hop right in here. So you remember in Genesis, we talked about the bottom line Hebraic picture of there being the Adamah, and then the Spirit of God, the Neshama, remember, joining together, which created something new, which was the Ruach Memelela. Remember, we talked about that, which was the kind of Jewish way of saying somehow we experience ourselves as being a nexus of both of those things, of flesh, of body, of living within this world with all of its not just desires, but instincts, things that we have to do, but also somehow we are combined with, and in a very way, whatever word you want to choose there, you can use any word you want to use, mired in, enmeshed in, or one with the Spirit of God, which is another way of saying the Neshama, which is another way of saying the image of God within us. That picture that we talked about, what that brought up as a new thing was consciousness, was awareness of being aware. You remember, Ruach Memelela is speaking spirit. So a way to say that is we're not merely our bodies and flesh, we are our mind about our bodies and flesh, and we are those things together, which is really important, because animals have all of the flesh and the body, etc., but they live off of instincts, as we know. So we also have instincts, but we also have parts of our brain that allow us to override those instincts. And not only that, we have a part of us that allows us to be aware of those instincts, and even to think about them, to contemplate them, et cetera, et cetera. So this creates a situation, amongst other things, that we become aware of the mortality of these bodies that we walk around with, right? And that's a really crucial little component that I know we don't walk around, and that's actually, we'll get to that. There's a primary reason we don't walk around being aware that we could die at any moment, though I think we all know that we could die at any moment. But of course, most of our life is lived with kind of this optimism of like, I'm not going to die anytime soon. You know what I mean? Like, that's still a long ways in the future. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be some ages of some people in this room, but I just, from my feel, not pointing any fingers. I'm just saying, I imagine that shifts a bit as you grow in years. But I think we still all have the experience, at least have for many years, at least, however you'd like to say that, of I am going to wake up and do today what it is that I think is important to do today. And not a single moment does a thought cross my mind that anything could happen at any given moment to where I cease to be who I am experiencing myself to be, right? I think we can all agree that that's an interesting part of our experience. So like the awareness of that, just so we're together, the awareness of that, if it weren't for two particular parts in our brain, that the anxiety that would overwhelm us on that would crush us. We would not be able to function. And we know this because there are many people who, because of different, whether it be a car crash or a deficiency in some area or disability, who don't have that and who do experience the crushing anxiety and feeling of, at any moment I could not be what I'm currently experiencing myself to be. At any moment I could die, right? So this, in anthropological, psychological language, we would just say, like, this awareness of mortality, of finitude, of being small, creates this situation where, becoming aware of it, you can go one of two ways. You can go either let me contemplate it all the time, and thus, debatable what you'll be able to accomplish while you're thinking about maybe not existing in the next moment or tomorrow or whatever. And we all know that wouldn't be very efficient or effective in any way. Or we go the other direction, which is what part of our mind helps us do, which is, if we push that out of awareness, if the part of our brain that pushes that out of awareness, what comes up into our awareness is what we can all say we're very grateful for, but we also need to just name it for what it is. And it's that we make important so many things that probably we could just say are not that important, right? If you are about to die, is it that important whether you're eating a hamburger or a salad?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Depending on which one you love, that's true. Okay, bad example. Okay. Is it? Yeah. Yeah.
If you were dying, it wouldn't matter if you had that hamburger.
That's true, isn't it? It's true. Even though you may enjoy that last taste of that, it wouldn't matter. And of course, this is where we can say, thankfully, we don't have to live with that moment to moment awareness of that, right? Because otherwise, all of the decisions that we make, they begin to pale in comparison with what is about to happen. You get what I'm saying? So that is a very, very, very
Ryan?
Yes.
Please forgive me for the interruption.
No, it's fine.
I just had to point this out. I don't know if I have mentioned this before in the class, but I am what the medical community calls a dextrocardia patient,
Okay.
which means my heart is on the opposite side.
Yeah.
It's actually called dextrocardiacitis inversus, which means my heart is on the opposite side. However, my grandmother said I've always been extra. So they had absolutely no category for the upside down and outside of my rib cage part.
Wow.
So dextrocardia was the closest category that they could put me in. And
Wow.
medically and statistically, dextrocardia patients do not live past their 4th birthday. So I've
Wow.
already lived 48 years longer than they said that I would have. And
Wow.
I can truly say that, when I was younger, a teenager, teenager growing up, our kids are, it's like, what? Heart on the other side? I don't care. Bring it on. Let's do
Yeah.
this. God forbid, my grandmother, she stayed in a constant state of, oh my God.
Mm.
But I did it all. I was in marching band, uh, ran track, played softball. Did all of it. And but now on the other side of um, it kind of, it's like,
Mm.
well, maybe I need to do things a little bit differently. So
Yeah.
not it's not that I think about dying, or not being here every day, but
Yeah.
the simple fact that my cardiologist, who specializes in this, he literally told me in 2020, we don't even have an explanation for as to why you're still here.
Mm.
So yeah.
Wow. That's great. Yeah.
I'm like, well, I have an explanation. My father
Yeah.
said so. So ta-da, here I am. So, but I kind of I get what you're saying, as I kind of get older, it's like, well, I've already been here 48 years
Mhm.
longer than they said I would be. But I can't focus on that.
Mhm.
I got to live my life for the fullest. I got to do what I can do for the Lord. I got to touch people's lives, wherever I can, wherever I go. And so I try my best not to focus on that. And
Yeah.
so I just wanted to share that with you guys so you could kind of see, kind of into what I'm thinking,
Yeah.
you know. It's
Yeah.
like I could look at that one or two ways. Okay, you've already been here 48 years longer than you're supposed to. Well, you're a ticking time bomb. So
Yeah.
I choose not to look at it that way. And I
Yeah.
take care of myself. I eat right. I exercise when I can. I do have my cheat days where I just, eat whatever. But I
Yeah.
try to keep those limited to Saturdays. But I do what I can. And I try not to think about that and just live my life according to the will of God and by the leadership of the Holy Spirit. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to
That's great.
share that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate that. It's a wonderful testimony anyway. Well, good. Well, then you'll have more thoughts as we go here. So let's keep going. So Hebrews 2 has always been a very interesting passage to me. And let's read it and then we'll keep going here with why it could be interesting. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too, of course, that's Jesus, shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, the diablos, the accuser, etc., and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. So like that's a pretty powerful statement. Now it becomes even more powerful. I think I took out a lot of it here, but it became even more powerful to me when I realized that there is. Sorry. Oh, do you need?
Oh, then.
We printed it, but we forgot to bring.
Oh, no problem. I was able to print just a few with David in there.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
just one.
Anybody else need one? Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I forgot to say that.
Randy, when you need to pass things out.
Was that?
Oh, I just said. When you-
Oh, yeah. Did you do one line?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Perfect. Printed just the right amount. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to keep going on that. So it turns out, and this is neither here nor there, it's just for those who appreciate corroboration of data, because that seems like a pretty random scripture. There's not a lot of other scriptures that really say it that clearly. But it turns out there's a the most empirically backed psychological and anthropological theory is precisely this. It's called terror management theory. And it is empirically backed by way they've done thousands of studies on how everything that we do is affected by our awareness of and fear of death. And it's really interesting, actually. So the idea here in A is that being held in slavery by fear of death. So I want us just to think about this like kind of an angle through which we can see what Paul is saying. And I'm not gonna say like that this is the only way of thinking about it, but I want us just to see it by way of an angle and try and see if this doesn't help us see what Paul is saying. So So fearing death, we act in various ways that are prompted by needs for self-preservation. Okay, so this is a necessary part of the brain's function, but becomes a primary aspect of our life ruled by me thinking, or like my own self-preservation. So, okay, B, life is ruled by a Darwinian-like survival instinct. So this comes from like what we know and understand of the reptilian brain. So we'll talk more about the brain next week and the next week, because it turns out it's super helpful to know about the brain, right? I mean, it turns out it has a large role in allowing us to do what we do and not do what we don't do. So we're gonna keep on with this next week and the next week. But bottom line that we know is that of course there's two sides to the brain. There's also the triune brain. I think we're together. So it's the reptilian, the middle mammalian, and then the neo, which is like the neocortex, etc. That's really important, and we're going to talk about how that goes together, and it 100% relates to all of this. But bottom line is the reptilian part of the brain is, of course, both the temporal lobe and the amygdala, and of course there's both sides to the amygdala. We'll talk about that later. But it being the primary place, the first place that, of course, from our vagus nerve up to the brainstem, where we get this awareness of there's a threat to me somehow. It's like the fear, call it the fear center, of course, because it's the first alarm, for lack of better words, along with the vagus nerve, of like, we have a problem here. And so as I think you read, a week or two ago, one of the key interesting things is that your brain can interpret this as a threat to your body, your physical body, or also a threat to your sense of self, intangible body, emotional body, however you'd like to say it, your identity body. Now, that's really interesting, because one of the things that we probably all know by now is the way in which, so stress being a response, a physiological and mind-oriented response to a threat. But that threat for us, most of our stress is not being chased by whatever, snake, lion, tiger, whatever. At least I hope not. But most of our threats are by way of a situation, a circumstance, somebody, right? Somebody who's particularly opposing to us, or one of our colleagues or family members who happens to state what they say against us all the time, or whatever it is. You notice that. How many of us have noticed that when you get into, if you're in a situation with somebody and they start attacking you by way of words, not with, this is not going to be a physical attack, but maybe it's a criticism, or it's a way of, trying to knock you down a few pegs, telling you you're wrong, et cetera, et cetera. We know what happens. What kind of physiological response happens? Like the exact same thing as if you had to run from something. Palms get sweaty. You start to get really warm. Maybe your ears warm up. You get butterflies in your stomach, your heart starts pumping really fast. It's all the same physiological responses of as if your body was under threat. But of course, your body's not under threat. But so here's one of the key things to understand is that this part of your brain, but specifically your whole brain, the way that you think stimulates this. So just to say, so your thoughts can stimulate this entire thing happening in your brain. So we don't need anything to stress us out. Like you can sit in a closet by yourself and stress yourself out. We're together on that, I think. Yeah. Any of us who have done the meditation have probably had that experience already of stressing ourselves out with whatever it is. Man, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. Or you replay whatever was happening in your day, et cetera, et cetera. Or you jump forward in the future, because our minds can do that. And you say, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? We stress ourselves out the whole time. And of course, what is really difficult about that is that when you're doing it with your thoughts, when your physiology is responding to your thoughts. So just so we're together, this is also pretty interesting, because a thought that you're having is shifting the physical experience of your body, right? So that's pretty interesting to just make ourselves aware of. Like our thoughts absolutely change and affect your body, and we'll just say reality in general. And one of the problems is that when you're getting chased by something and then it goes away, either you get eaten and you're done, or you get away from it and then you can take a deep breath, and then your body knows that everything is okay right now. So one of the reasons why, like when you take a deep breath, and especially when you exhale, like a sigh of relief, that is a memorized trigger for your body to just relax. It's really interesting. Anytime you feel stress at all, you can just take that deep breath like that. And it just completely deactivates any bit of the fight or flight, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the whole point in saying all that is if you don't do that, if you have a mind that keeps running and you're continually either worried about something in the future or thinking about something in the past, you can literally be stressing yourself out all day, every day, right? And your body never has a chance to do like that, right? And that's where 90% of our physical ailments come from, is that, right? Because you're literally running your body down. You're just completely, you're deflating it of all of its energy, etc. So that's once again, why it's so important to have a practice of silence meditation. If you happen to be one whose mind runs, then it gives you a little reprieve. It like just allows things to reset. And then if you want to go back at it with all your thoughts, go for it. Or it helps you to reset enough to where you can notice when you're worried about something in the future or thinking about something in the past, right? I mean, this is the whole thing to me about catching our thoughts and taking every thought captive. Now, the reason why we say all of that is because when that fight or flight system, a fight or flight mechanism takes place in your body, the particular parts of your brain that turn on and the particular parts turn off. Now, unfortunately, the parts that turn on are particular. Well, let me say it this way. It is this way they think, I think, scientists think, because they don't want all of your brain doesn't want all of your, well, let's just think about what we need to do here. Let's consider all the options when you're being chased, whatever, or when you're being attacked. So all of that shuts down so that all you do is, I know the thing I need to do and it's run or whatever, you know what I mean? Well, problematically, those same parts of your brain shut down when you're having an argument with somebody, right? Which is part of why you can never quite think of what you need to say when you're in an argument, right? Because that whole part of your brain is completely shut down. So now you're in this mode of like trying to run away, or your brain's wanting you to run away or fight or something, but you're trying to be a decent human being and a Christian and talk calmly, and you just cannot for the life of you do it because the parts of your brain that are supposed to help you do that have completely gone offline, right? Has anybody else had this experience? Yeah, okay. Like every single argument we have this experience. So now what's so helpful to know about this is that the part of our mind that is online, not just when you're in an argument, but if you don't turn it off, it can be all the time, is that same part of your mind that is me oriented, that is self-preservation oriented, that is me versus you, that is us versus them, right? So that is the same part of your mind that will just be online all the time. No wonder, like when you're in a mode of having a debate with somebody, how many of us, like you have a debate, a run-in with somebody, you are going to think about that until the next time you see them or whatever, isn't it? Like we all ruminate on it. But more than that, have you noticed that like while you're doing that, your ability to actually feel compassion for that person or anybody is way decreased, right? If not completely shut down. Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't know if you had something to say there. Okay. So what we start to notice is this is just a basic physiological brain orientation thing that we experience. But if you're not aware of it, and if you're not aware of all the ways in which this gets triggered in you, you could be running around and we're going to make the connection in a second, in this part of our mind that is it's the least likely to be loving of any part of your mind, right? In fact, just a simple way to say it is not able to love, right? So like, if you just think about it that way, you can just say, part of the reason why we stop and recoup and breathe and allow ourselves to settle in, as Paul tells us, in thoughts from above, in metanoia, in the epinoia, and the thoughts, rather than on the thoughts from below, our earthly thoughts, is because otherwise you'll never have the ability or the potentiality to actually be able to be a loving person. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Right. So that's part of what, and let's just keep going just to make the connection here. So that's part of what many scholars have noted that Paul talks about when he talks about the sarx, the flesh. So I put it there just so we can be together on it. So sarka or sarx is understood as the flesh, but it's not the flesh as in like your meat suit here. It's not like Well, yeah, here, we'll just keep going because you'll see, we all know that, but you'll see very clearly that that's not what Paul's talking about, because your flesh is not the problem. Your body's not the problem. And indeed, we can say your brain is not even the problem because it's helping you out, right? So what is the problem is the mind that lives according to the flesh, or rather those thoughts that go according to the flesh. So you look at sarx or sarka is contrasted with soma, which is the Greek word for general, for the body in general. So like, again, that's like body of Christ, just your body in general, the spirit lives in your body, et cetera, et cetera. Somas are used. Sarx is saved for the specific experience of being in the reptilian brain, for lack of better words. And it is that self-preservation, is all the thoughts that come from that me orientation, for lack of better words. So living according to the flesh is the kata sarka. Those are the words that are used. Then of course he uses sarka anthropos, which is like the sarkic man. Then he like leos anthropos, which is like the old man, but it's equivalent to sarkic man. So yeah, that's okay. Let me just make that as clear as possible really quick. So this is where Paul uses three different sets of analogies with it. And I think it's just really helpful to see them laid next to each other. So he'll use old self and new self. And of course, what he'll say about the old self is the same thing that he says about the sarx, right? So those we can say are roughly equivalent, and thus the new would be equivalent to the pneuma self, the pneumatic self, which is the spirit self, the spiritual man, as he says in 1 Corinthians. So really quick on A, scholars agree that it is indicative of our reptilian animalistic mind body. And since the self that becomes rivalrous, prideful, envious, etc. Okay, sorry, that was about the sarx. Relating to ourselves, others in the world through the lens of scarcity, self-preservation, fear-based thinking, etc. Now, okay, let's look at Romans 8:5, just one or two examples here really quick. Those who live according to the flesh, so that's kata sarka, set their minds on the things of the flesh. So literally that is phroneo sarka. It's literally like flesh mind. So in the Greek, so it's literally like those who live kata sarka are phroneo sarka. They are of the mind of the flesh, and that is they live in a way that is the mode of self-preservation, of fear, of rivalry, of me versus you, et cetera, et cetera. But those who live according to the spirit, and that would be pneuma, set their minds on things of the spirit, and that would be fruit of the spirit, love, reconciliation, et cetera. Now, let me just let's just look at one. All those are there just to give you examples and whatnot. Let's look at C. Yeah. Because this is interesting, because Paul here is, of course, this Philippians 3. So it is we who are the circumcision, we who serve God by his spirit, who boast in Christ Jesus, and who put no confidence in the sarx, flesh. So it's interesting. Once again, it's not that the flesh, the sarx is not referring to the body being problematic, because even here he's saying what he used to put confidence in was all the ways in which he conceived of himself as better than other people, right? Then he lists all of them. We'll look at it next week, but he lists all of them. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. I was perfect in regards to the law. I was of the tribe of Benjamin. I was all these different things. So that's really interesting. So that's where, obviously, that's what makes you pause for a second and ask the question, what all is it that is living according to the flesh? Because for Paul, he equated it with a sense of self that he had that, for lack of better words, allowed him to feel that he was better than somebody else. Just as simple as that. And that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Because that's almost like becoming habitually practiced in this stressed out reptilian mind, so that your dominant way of thinking is always me first, right? That's almost what Paul is saying. I'm just trying to put words to it to try and get a feel for it. Such that, and then Paul subsequently, again, we'll read this next week, but just to hit it here, Paul subsequently says, I now consider all that to be rubbish, trash, right? And that's really interesting. You see, like, part of what I feel like he's saying is all of those things that allowed me to have that practiced experience of being me versus you, of seeing me as better than you, or however you like to say that. I'm now going to consider all that to be nothing, so that now I can see me and you as equal on the same plane, right? I no longer want there to be anything that allows me to say, when I look at you, that I see anything other than You are a beloved son, daughter of God, made in the image of God, et cetera, et cetera. Are we together so far? Yeah. Okay, cool. So those are a bunch of other examples of that, but let's just keep going here. So yeah, let's just go to the summary really quick. And you can read the rest of this. I just kind of want to move so that we can get to some of this other stuff. But so by our subconscious fear, of course, it's subconscious because it's been pushed out of our conscious awareness of dying and feeling of nothing or unworthy or feeling small, etc. Our desire for self-preservation kicks in, and we are held in a state of constantly making decisions from our fear-based mind rather than being what we are called to be, the nishmad, image bearers of God who is love, etc. But the sarkic mind can't love. It's a mind that is oriented towards threat, self-preservation, fear, which forces one to live as if one is merely a body that must survive. Now, of course, forgetting, so this part of our mind has completely forgotten for us that we are not merely a body, right? That we are also spirit. But it doesn't know that. It's completely forgotten that. So whenever you perceive of yourself from this perspective, you are perceiving of yourself as a body. And thus, once again, all of your thoughts are going to be, how do I preserve my body? But more than that, how do I preserve the sense of self that I feel is housed in my body? Are we together? But you see, what Paul's going to do is going to just as a, jumping ahead, is he's going to help us to see but what if you weren't just your body? And what if that way of thinking about yourself is not true about yourself? What if you could release all of that? And what if, in fact, all of that died? How would you feel then? And how would that free you then? And then those are crucial questions by way of how would you feel if you were really attached to the way in which you thought of yourself as being better than other people? You're not going to like that much, right? And that's where I think, I'll just say, that's all of our experience, but specifically for the Jews, that's where they're going to find themselves, because they're going to be in a space where the entirety of their world is oriented around, their entirety of the worldview is oriented around, just like Paul said, we are God's favorite people. We are the chosen people. Our God is the best, and your gods are second gods anyway, right? We have the right law, Torah, rules, etc. Y'all's are the worst, / you don't have any. We live according to that, and thus we live in the right way. You guys don't, etc., 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 right? The entirety of the worldview is oriented around, I'm up here, you guys are down here, right? So you can just imagine, Paul has his work cut out for him in his own experience, like you've been leading us through. His own experience had to have been so disorienting. It had to have been. And any of us who've had an experience of thinking that maybe we were up here to be brought down, it's unbelievably jarring. And it's unbelievably humbling is a word, but disorienting. Because if the entirety of your perception of yourself in relation to other people has all of a sudden been crushed and or been completely removed, it's almost like you don't know how to relate to people anymore, right? And just use an easy example. If you've been, like us over there in Malawi, once you've been operating at the so-called what they deem as a higher level of being a missionary and or a director, etc. If you and everybody in the cultural situation, they know exactly how to relate to you whenever you are a missionary, director, etc. And that's part of how, like we said 1 or 2 times ago, you have to just play the game, right? Because if you try and step out of that, they do not know how to relate to you. There is no, they don't say, oh, good, now he's down here on our level. No, it's complete disorientation. It's no. What do we do? How do we greet you? How do we respond to you? How do we treat you? And that's a really good example, because same in the first century Jewish world, different. It's similar to America, but let's just use it. Let's use that example. You have hierarchies of people, right? So even in Malawi, the way that you greet a beggar on the street is different than the way that you greet a preacher or a pastor or anybody who's been educated. Just quite simply. And it's in many cultures is that way. But so first century Judaism, if you have a hierarchy of people, right, and you guys happen to be on the top or somewhere there, and your entire culture is oriented around the way that you talk with a prostitute or not talk to a prostitute, or the way that you avoid and make sure that you don't talk to particular people, and the way that you make sure that you greet and say positive things about particular people. Now, all of a sudden, just imagine like you have this whole system and everybody knows exactly what to do. And everybody knows how I greet you and how I greet you and the words that I say, et cetera, et cetera. Now, just imagine all of a sudden that comes crashing to a halt by way of everybody who's at the bottom comes up and everybody's at the top comes down and you're on the exact same playing field. Just imagine what kind of chaos that would be. Just, I mean, like as much as we want to say that would be wonderful because that would be like the kingdom, you could also say in a sociocultural milieu or how you like to say experience, community, whatever, pure chaos. I mean, like their roles, to lose their I mean, like their practiced ways of seeing themselves and other people. You get what I'm saying? And I think this is the situation that Paul is finding himself in. But I think also that we find ourselves in often if we're aware of it, because our culture also has a lot of these rules, not in the same kind of necessarily stated hierarchical kind of way, but it does have a lot of these rules, doesn't it? So anyway, we'll just keep going. But any thoughts there before we keep going?
That makes it a little bit clearer, because whenever you described it a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, yes, you may be here. They may think you're here and you know you're not, but you've got to maintain that because we need inspiration and people to look up to and to trust. And
all that. You're right. Yeah, all those roles are like, they're so important. And it's so interesting because socioculturally, in a way, those roles are important. I mean, just like you said, like one for people to look up to and things like that. But more than that, in like Malawi, for example, which is like a patron-client society, you need people to be up here if you're down here to be able to have people to ask for money and to be able to have people to be able to help you when you have a problem, etc. So if all the sum, so like this is what you were saying, Dale. Say something about what you were explaining about some of what we know about if everybody in the early church gives away all their money and releases their positions of power, it creates another kind of destability, like you were talking about the other day. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the sort of I could call it the honeymoon phase of the church in the early chapters of Acts, whenever we have people selling their goods, giving kind of equalization among the saints. I mean, people, if a Christian had a field, they would sell it and help poor Christians. And it was a really beautiful time. But a result of that we don't think about as often is it was just a general kind of impoverishing of Christians specifically in Jerusalem. And so when persecution came, that whole situation got worse. And then something that happened in this time, there was a famine that affected all of the world at that time. But specifically, those people who had zero margin, they were basically living hand to mouth. I'm actually going to talk about that some not tomorrow, but next week. Okay. So that kind of became one of Saul's main works that we don't think about a lot, but one of his main works is going around to Gentile churches, taking up collections, and then bringing it back to Jerusalem. And his hope was to help these people that were literally starving to death. But also, I think it was out of great love for his people, thinking if they see their Gentile brothers helping them, it's going to soften hearts. Not just, I don't know. I think there was still some tension even among Jewish Christians towards Gentiles, even though what happened with Peter and Cornelius, and I think that was just, I think we underestimate how much tension that was there. So that was kind of what we were.
That's great. Yeah, that's super helpful to me. Yeah.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
We were talking about something that I thought about specifically when we were looking at the passage in Philippians, where Paul is talking about all of his credentials that he now thinks are as rubbish or loss. I think one of the things you said earlier, going all the way back to the Genesis story about the creation of man, and you had this, I was trying to find the word again. It was like the body and then the spirit.
Yeah.
So you have in the creation, you have God creating man, creating this man of flesh, but also with man. And so I don't understand how you think of it, but whatever, whatever is in us that makes us who we are. It's not really our physical bodies. There's something inside of us. And I think initially it was very much connected to God. And so you see in the creation, man in particular is this meeting place between God and creation. Then all that gets lost. And we kept, when sin entered the world, we didn't just, it's not like puppets and you cut the strings. People continue to be individuals. They can continue to have personalities, so that whatever this electricity is that makes us who we are, talk and speak, it fell in a way. Our bodies fell in a sense, and that we get older and we wear out and we die, but our personality, our souls fell in a sense. I wouldn't say it, but and so what's interesting, I just see it all through Scripture. What's happening is God is trying to get back to that place where the meeting point between heaven and earth is within. And in the Old Testament, what he's doing, he draws Abraham out and says, I'm going to make you my special people. And he creates he dwells with him in the tabernacle. That's the place where heaven meets earth, is in the tabernacle on the mercy seat. And then it becomes the temple. And then you have this over and over again, God calling his people to be his people, and over again, his people saying, no, thank you. Either outright or just because of the choices that they make. And so I think when we think about what Saul's talking about in Philippians chapter 3, I think there was definitely a sense practically that he's thinking, I have all these good things going for me. That makes me better better than the prostitutes and tax collectors, but it really makes me better than everybody. Mm-hmm. But I think what drove him to do it was he's thinking, if be holy, then I can something needs to happen. I know things aren't okay inside of me. I know things aren't okay with the world. What he believed, and I think what all Jews believed, was God needs to come back. That's probably a little bit too critical way to say it, but the presence of God that dwelt in the temple needs to come back. He needs to make us once again his people, the meeting place between heaven and earth. And so what Saul thought, what the Pharisees and people like him thought, was we can be holy enough, we'll be good enough for God to come back. But what he experienced is God came back through Christ. And all of a sudden, all this, it was kind of an equalization. All this stuff that he was very proud of, he recognized, no, it's not that. It's not about going back in time and recreating that existed in the days of David and Solomon. It's happening now, and it's not in a place, it's in us. It's really going back to and becoming pre-fall man. Because God is living in us through the power of his Spirit.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for all that. It's really good. Man. That makes me think, just like you're saying that is, I think part of what Paul is doing there that we can all relate to is, or rather, like, going back to Genesis and thinking about it like that. It's interesting that the theme that we normally orient idolatry around is around other gods, as in like the gods of the neighboring country and or idols, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like part of what's happening here, like what you're saying, is that it is just as easy, or rather easier and more slick, more sly, that we don't really notice it, to set up an idol of ourselves or of somebody else within ourselves, within our own thinking as to who we are. Because like the bottom line, like you're saying, is the crucial thing of, like we went through in Genesis 1-3, the truth about who I am, about who you are, and the truth about where my value comes from is already given. Like, it is that the Spirit of God is within me, that I am an image bearer of God, that I'm a child of God, however you'd like to say that. But now, if I say, no, like that's not, that's not the most crucial thing. The most crucial thing is that I'm a whatever, good Christian. I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. I follow all the law. You know what I mean? Those are just another ways in which we set up little idols in our mind. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I feel like that's part of what Paul is doing as well. And like you're saying, that it's almost so simple. It's almost too simple. It's just as simple as, do you see yourself as God sees you? It's almost just as simple as that, right? And because like the moment, and again, like this is where, like you said, if you want to call it like post-fall kind of thing, this is where if we have forgotten who we are, if we've forgotten that state, you said like pre-fall state, however you'd like to say that, if we've forgotten that or even lost the ability to be aware of it, whatever, and then here comes Jesus helping us to be aware of it, and of course, Paul helping us to be aware of it, it would follow then, it would make sense that all the other ways in which we tried to value ourselves are no longer worth anything, right? That would follow and make sense. And I think that's part of like the really tricky thing that I think Paul is up against, or that Paul experienced himself, was how now, like you said, how now do I experience myself, be aware of myself, and be aware of all the zeal that I had for that which, and yeah, we'll get to some of his words on the Torah here in a second, but like that which like there is good too, and yet it has also become something that may be slightly different than what it was intended, etc. So how now do I be zealous, but not in a way that begets us versus them or violence in the way it did the first time? How now do I be zealous in a way that is oriented from that freedom that we have in love, et cetera, et cetera? You know, I'm just walking through it. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or. All right, well, let's just hop down to, just because we're running out of time. Well, it's a good example. Let's hop down to number 2. It's cultural worldviews. So, just really quick, the statement right above it, I put it in whatever color that is. A part of function of our brain and or the way our mind works is as a defense against some of the potential anxiety of experiencing ourselves as unworthy, small, mortal, finite, et cetera, et cetera. 2 primary defenses are created. And the first one is defense mechanisms, which put in place and begin to run that which we call the personality structure. That's all really interesting, and that needs to be a conversation, but not today. Number 2 is culture. And this is what is very interesting, I think. And this is what I think Paul is picking up on or noting. And it's quite simply that codified value systems, such as cultures, allow us to pretend that we are valuable within the subjective values of a society. That's a pretty rugged statement, I know, because if anybody, maybe not for any of us here, but if any of us happen to feel that we are that our importance comes from some aspect of a cultural milieu of the society, whether it's our role, our job, our wealth, our power, whatever, then that's a really difficult statement, right? Because what it turns out is that cultures are, simply put, are subjectively put together systems in order to allow people to experience a sense of value and or stability here. So let's just keep going. We talk a lot about worldviews, Malloy, because like, just to say it, not everybody, well, I would say everybody has a very different worldview, pretty much every single person, but most specifically cultures have a very way of talking about. So Ernest Becker notes, I love this definition, that cultures are codified hero system. You could almost say, like what we just said, codified idol systems, right? Because he calls them hero systems because they are avenues by which ordinary, finite, ordinary people, and just read it, like you can even just hear it, that who are otherwise not very important or not really worth anything, but it gives them avenues by which they can really become something, and that is we'll keep going on what all a culture is. But even if you just stop there for a moment, you can say, okay, I need to be really careful all the ways in which I attribute to myself any standing as it relates to the societal values and or roles, right? Because just simply put, and you experience it when you go to a different country in a more than, well, you can even just imagine it, but you go to a different country and you realize real fast, okay, make it not Malawi, make it India, you realize real fast that all of the value that you thought you had with particular roles that you were within in Lubbock, Texas, you no longer have those anymore, right? It's just as simple as that. So like, that's where you have this momentary awareness of, oh snap, maybe those things aren't as important as I thought they were, and they're not as much of me as I thought they were, right? And that becomes really, I mean, that's a really helpful experience, because if you particularly go to a place where everything that you are is not appreciated, then that's even more so, right? Because once again, that's going to make you rely upon something true about yourself that is more true than all these societal values and roles that we play, right? So for example, when I went to India, and there was not a single thing with this particular group that we were with, except for the few pastors that we were with, but we were visiting these people who were Hindu people. And there's not a single thing about who Ryan is that was impressive to them, right? Not a single thing, right? Not the color of my skin, not where I'm from, not my education, not anything, right? So like I had just got done, it was whiplash, because I had just got done being with a group of pastors who really valued all those things and really appreciated, specifically, being Christian, all that, they really valued me for some of those roles, which is almost equally not as helpful, because then you can begin to think that you're those roles and those whatever aspects of yourself, you know what I mean? But then it was whiplash, because then we went right over to this other group and they could care less about anything about myself, whatever, and that it hit me while I was there as well. Like, thank goodness, like the value that we all have is not in direct relationship to our whatever, our race, our history, our education, your talents, your wealth. Thank goodness that's not true, right? Because otherwise, yeah, I mean, a lot of people do think that's true, and a lot of people experience a lot of pain because of that, right? But here, let's just keep going. So worldviews also provide, a religious worldview and a cultural worldview provide the same thing. So a cognitive foundation, beliefs agreed upon, emotional safety and stability, routine validation of values, and cohesion and order. And then several others help to note that cultures all hold within themselves practices concerning holiness, purity, and sacrifice. Now, to say that in a better way, holiness and or borders. So the question of who is in and who is out, what makes a person, place, or thing like pure or good or safe. So like the roles, the rules by which we live, etc. And what practices defend against the border of our group, right? So those are just the key things that are always a part of a culture or a group. And that's really interesting, because needless to say, this is like 100%, we're talking about the Torah here. We're talking about every other cultural system, but the Torah here. So let's just hop down, here, let me just because these are good examples. Most common hero systems include, we all know them: fame, expertise, your religious tradition, wealth, intellect, beauty, character, your network. These are just all things that we give some value to and measure ourselves based upon. Now, character is a very interesting one, right? Because this is one that is usually applauded in so many different ways, specifically within a Christian, Judeo-Christian kind of culture. We normally applaud anyone who is halfway has a character about them, you know what I mean? Which is perfectly well and good. But you can realize, and we all know it, we've all experienced it, there are many people whose personality systems are as such that they have learned that it is best for me if I abide by the character of the society in which I live, right? So it is not a development of character by way of the way in which I can be an exemplar of that love that I want to give to everybody, et cetera, et cetera. It is just quite simply the most efficient way of getting what I want to get. And that's a really interesting point. So just an example on that, one of our main colleagues in Malawi, who has more education and kind of more awareness of things than I would say a lot of our other colleagues, he pulled Ben aside one time and he asked Ben, or they were having a conversation, he asked Ben, okay, do you know why Malawi is called the warm heart of Africa? Because, I mean, it's routinely, that's just, Malawi is the warm heart of Africa, right? And so he asked Ben, do you know why it's called that? Of course, Ben was like, I'm white and American, and like, I'm not going to answer this question. What do you think? And he was like, well, it's the warm heart of Africa because on the face, everybody is very warm. And the reason why everybody is very warm is because they know if they are warm to you, they will get something from you. It's as simple as that. That needless to say was a very astute observation. But also it was very difficult. It was a very difficult thing to hear because of course we had experienced all of the warmness. Now, I'm not saying that across the board. There are very genuinely, wonderfully warm, kind, loving people. But on the whole, that's very true. It's just to be able to state, again, culture provide avenues of creating the type of people that they want to have in their culture and trying to get out the people that they don't want to be there, right? So they're once again, they're us versus them, however you'd like to say that, dynamics, cultures, whatever. Okay, so hold on, one more point on this, and then let's go to these few scriptures. So number 2, one of the greatest defenses against the anxiety of death is certainty and control. And one of the greatest forms of control is certainty of knowledge. So knowing equals security in an uncertain world. I think we could all kind of feel why that's the case. So Becker notes, no wonder people rage over fine points of belief. If your adversary wins the argument about truth, you die. Of course, you do not actually die, at least in modern times, but the part of you that has staked your identity to a belief or a way of thinking dies. And if this part of you is related to your master identity or sense of self, then your life, or at least an interpretation of it, becomes fallible because your self-esteem system has become fallible. Does anyone have any thoughts on that paragraph or statement?
I think a good way to think about all this is it's very, very easy to recognize in other people and very hard to recognize in yourself.
Yeah.
Really understand what he's talking about. Go talk to a teenager about like Pokemon or video games. And it's this whole world that's just they're like excited about. And you're like, this is, and you fight the urge to say, that's ridiculous. Why are you wasting your time with that? I do it many times a week. But you don't see it in yourself. There's all these other things in our lives that are important. And they're important because if someone were to say, explain to me why that's important, you would just get angry because it's evidently important. And so, yeah, it's a little bit like if we were playing Monopoly. You don't play Monopoly the way you live your life.
Yeah. And
these, I guess, hero systems, kind of these things in what you said about character was interesting. It's not true integrity.
Yeah.
It's how do I operate? How do I play this game?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. Well, let's get to these passages here in Galatians 3. So hop down there to, I think, point number 3. So Paul uses this phrase, tas tokeia to cosmo. So in 3 passages. So I think this is really important because he begins to give us, or let me just say this. So those words are normally interpreted as, or in the NIV, of course, I just don't have it with me. Yeah, how is it interpreted in the NIV? I think it's like the spiritual forces of the world. How does it say in yours?
So when we were children, we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world.
Basic principles of the world. Okay, well, that's more helpful. I think the one that I had had a spiritual element to it. So, which is all well and good. Like you can get a lot from, however you would like to interpret that. But there's a particular individual who has written an enormous book on precisely this, and who goes to great detail to argue and show that in first century Judaism, that translation that you just gave, Del, is way better. It is quite simply the socio-economic, cultural way in which a society is set up. That's quite simply what it is. So now, what is really interesting about this to me that I had never really noticed was that Paul is going to equate this with the Torah. So let's just read this really quick. So Galatians 3:23. So before this faith came, we were held prisoners by the Torah, locked up until faith should be revealed. So the Torah was put in charge to lead us to Christ that we may be justified by faith. Now that faith has come, we are no longer under the supervision of the Torah. That's a very interesting statement to me, because it denotes that the slavery under which they are in, the principles of the sociocultural reality in which they are in, is that of the Torah, and that it's evidently pretty problematic. So let's just keep going here to get a better, clear picture. Galatians 4. What I'm saying is that as long as an heir is a child, he is no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. Thought that was interesting, a great allusion to the elder brother. The heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by the father. So also, when we were children, we were in slavery under the elements of the cosmos, the Torah Tostokeia. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of woman, born under Torah, to redeem those under the Torah. Slavery, okay, so I just put slavery is under the stokeia of the Torah here, that we might receive adoption as sonship, adopted from the Torah taskmaster to children under the Abba, the father, mother, father, loving God, who we can say Abba, Father. Because you are his sons, God sent the spirit of his son into our hearts, the spirit who calls out Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave under the stokeia of Torah, but now you are a child, and since you are a child, you are also an heir. Now, I never fully realized that was the argument that he was making until this Tostokeia become clear to me, because you can kind of see what he's saying then is you are a slave under the socioeconomic way of being that was the Torah. Now, the obvious thing to me that this is difficult with is, of course, we all want to say, but wait, I thought that was what God had given everyone, that we thought that this was in some way going to be helpful, etc. And in some ways, no doubt it was, but it's interesting to me that Paul's words here, they're not even he's not, no wonder he got stoned so many times. To say that point blank, being under the Torah is like being under slavery. And then, so just so we're together, the verse 5 and 6 of Galatians 4 is the exact same thing that's in Romans 8 and 5, I think. It's almost the exact same trajectory, where he says, you have now been given a spirit of freedom. Do you really want to go back to the spirit of fear, which is slavery? And of course, equating the exact same thing of where you were under the spirit of fear and slavery is under the Torah, under the sociocultural milieu of the Torah. Now that's a pretty solid argument. So let's just keep going really quick, just get the full thing and let's chat about it. So Colossians 2:20, since you died with Christ to the basic elements of the world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? So again, notice that the stokeia is directly linked to Torah. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with use because they are based on human commands and teachings. That's my way wide. That's not Paul's. That'd be funny if that was Paul's. So Paul, I put wait what there because they are all based on human commands and teachings. The Torah, that was the first time that really jumped out to me as being a particularly painful thing to say. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship and their false humility and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining indulgence. And I put why not? Of course, because the entire edifice is built upon death, fear of death and or perceived separation from God, etc. So that's of course why it has no ability to actually shift, no ability to actually change. Now let's just pause there for a second, or rather hit that A really quick. Paul seems to associate the Torah as a parent guardian teaching the child, but not really a kind parent. It's more like a taskmaster, in supervision of the child, which is a slave, and the way that they should go so that they could leave the house of the parent guardians and be led just like a child leaves, a teenager leaves and goes to college, and be led by faith and an internal compass, and be able to live in the freedom of all those principles, love, etc. Instead of utilizing the Torah as a means to an end, which is love as the fulfillment of Torah, they turned the means, the Torah, into an end in itself, making it a means and an end to which the right relationship with God, etc., etc. Now, I don't know what y'all's thoughts are on that. I'd be keen to hear, because when I read that this time with the milieu of what we just got done talking about how this desire that we have comes up, and particularly one, the desire to be of value, to be worth something, and the way in which the culture provides basically an avenue by which you can have that value and worth that you're looking for, right? So basically, as Paul is saying it's the Torah system has basically created that for people, just like every other culture creates it, right? But notice the massive difficulty with this, I mean, there's tons of difficulties, but the massive difficulty is that you can never actually achieve anything of stable or solid value, can you? Because like you said, like Del said, if your whole world is wrapped up in the world of Pokemon, what happens, which is a very legitimate, you're right, for many kids, what happens what if all the Pokemon got pulled? What if it all disappeared? What if it all got proclaimed, whatever, and it all disappeared? Where we
Drop your phone in the toilet.
That's it. Well, if you drop your phone in the toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that's not it's not an odd example. I mean, like this happens, right? And more than that, I mean, all the other obvious ones are, what if your entire sense of worth and value is oriented around how you look? And what if something shifts in how you look? Then you're crushed. What if your entire worth and or value is oriented around your wealth and or your role in society? And what happens when, as it's happened 1,000 times, you, for whatever reason, automatically you lose that somehow, whatever. You're in a car wreck, the stocks go down, et cetera, and you lose everything. It's like, you see, like the problem with cultures, I mean, the good thing about cultures is that they allow us to, if I can say it this way, they allow us to have avenues in which we can pretend and experience value and worth. Now, the way that I see it is that the same thing that Paul is saying about the Torah is that cultures are there to help prop you up, to give you a head start, for lack of better words, to give you a sense of value, to give you a sense of kind of pushing you in the right direction towards the awareness. And that's what we say to our girls too. Like, you are valuable in every single way. Your worth, it does not come from how beautiful you are. And that's one that we're going to have to really hone in on them, because they're very beautiful. And like, but like all those, I mean, it's just all these things that we have to give them the affirmation. You have to give a child all that affirmation. It's almost like, I mean, y'all who are all parents, and y'all know this way better than I do, but it's almost like you have to really convince them that they're the greatest thing in the world for like 10 years, and then try and convince them that they're not the greatest thing in the world, right? That's right? That's kind of how I feel it with our daughters. It's like, I'm always trying to make sure that they know how awesome they are in every single way. But now the trick that I try and be aware of is not tying that to any one of their performance, their beauty, their education, whatever, just stating it as clearly as possible as who they are, especially when they make mistakes and such. But I kind of feel like Paul is saying the Torah was to do the same thing. It was supposed to give you this foundation through which you could grow to experience who you are. And then in a way you no longer need it. I mean, just like Paul is saying right here. In fact, you should be able to graduate from it, and have that internal compass enough to be able to make the decisions out of love that you can make. But instead of doing that, it became a system of value and worth in which they hung out within the system and made sure that everybody outside the system never got to experience that. You get what I'm saying? Which is the same as what a lot of cultures do. But anyway, let me pause there. Is there any thoughts or comments on that?
The only, we don't really understand what the Torah meant to the Jewish people. Probably the closest thing we could come to it, and it's not even a real good analogy, is the Constitution.
Yeah, right.
We think the Constitution is our rules.
Yeah.
That's what we go by. It's the foundation of our country.
Yeah.
And if somebody came along and said, okay, those rules are gone, you're no longer under the Constitution. Yeah. We wouldn't be very happy with that person.
Yeah.
We'd all stumble. I mean, and
Yeah.
That's going on in our country now.
Yeah, it's
You know,
true.
there's a whole group, and it's really splitting us down the middle of,
Yeah.
where do you fall in that category?
Yeah, man, well said. That's a great analogy, because you're right. Even just like the Constitution, all of its guidelines and rules were supposed to be helpful in engendering within us a particular way of living, right? Instead, rather than starting to live in that freedom to love, et cetera, as was the original vision, we keep getting hampered by all these rules, and or we keep having to redefine and split hairs on basically every single rule, because we have to have it say something different and different time to a different place, different person, et cetera. So yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, thanks for that.
And all of those were meant for God's people to know God and just simply to humble themselves before that God.
Yeah, that's it. It's almost like it's so simple. It was supposed to be so simple and so clear, man. Yeah, well said.
Do you, one question, it's clear, you know, the Galatians, their problem was that there were a lot of Jewish Christians that had come in and were saying, you have to be Jewish, you know, or maybe they wanted to be Jewish. And so what he's saying to him in chapter 4, he's saying, this is the fulfillment of all of that. Why would you want to go back to try to pretend? I mean, it's almost like if a person, we love our kids when they're small, but if your 20-year-old is acting like a baby, it's a problem.
Yeah, for
I think that's what a little was happening. I'm not sure Paul's talking about the Torah in Colossians. That's a different problem. I mean, weren't they more? It wasn't so much going back to the old Judaism. It was more about, you know, ascetic, you know, self-denial. I mean, I don't know what all its roots were, but I've never thought about like what he says about the basic elements of this world that he's talking about Torah. It's a similar system. I mean, they're all in a sense the same thing. It's something that we can performatively do that gives us value and worth and meaning, apart from just saying, acknowledge, I mean, just being who we are before Christ. But I've never thought of him talking about Torah as much in Colossians as he was in Galatians.
Yeah, no, you're right. So those two Colossian statements you're talking about. Yeah. Well, I mean, one, I'm with you. I've never noticed that as well. So just to say that's kind of what hit me. And I think as we go here, I mean, we'll be done for today, but as we go here, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like this is his argument. And like you said, like the elements of the world could also go for the Gentile world or for any other culture. You know, that could be anything. But his argument here very specifically, or I mean, in both places, very specifically is the boundary lines between what is holy and what is profane, or the boundary lines between where God is and where God is not. The boundary lines between who is in and who's out, the boundary, you know, et cetera, those have been completely ruptured, completely. Like even just notice, like, I mean, even just him saying right there, now you don't even need the temple, right? Because now you can just say Abba Father. It's like those words right there. And I think that's what Jesus was also saying with the kingdom of heaven is within you. Those are the most disruptive words you could ever say to a Jewish person, right? Because the entirety of the worldview is oriented around, no, what we do is we do all of this cleanliness stuff throughout the week. And then we are able then to go to the place where we can actually be near to God, not actually communicate or anything, but just be near theoretically. You know what I mean? The entire thing is oriented around that. So to completely crush that, I mean, like, that's where I feel like this is just the kind of radical, like, power of the good news. I feel like that I even hardly, you know, every time I read this, it's just a little bit more of like, oh my goodness, it's way more radical than I thought it was. And it's way more good news than I thought it was, but it's also way more bad news, depending on how tied you are to a particular system, right? So like, that's where I think same in Colossians, I don't know the whole situation in Colossians, but it seems like there was a group of people, because back up, he had a group of individuals who were convinced in different ways that their ability to be right with God still oriented around rules, whether it's Torah rules or another set of Gentile rules. I don't know, because he says very, you know, right there in the one we read, but also further up, he's canceled against us all these rules that you thought you had to follow. It's like, even that right there, like, that's a big problem for any Jewish person to hear, and for us, because you just imagine Paul and like us having the same situation, and imagine Paul coming to us and saying, hey, by the way, like, everything that you've kind of set up here with like your church and all these like things that you think you need to do, et cetera, yeah, just, you don't need that anymore. Just be done, right? Like, how would we respond to that? Like, we would respond like, well, one, Paul, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, everything we do is pretty good and it's really helpful. You know what I mean? Like, but also we would respond a bit more like, absolutely not. Like, these are all God-given, right? These are all things that God told us to do, et cetera. Well, it's like, that's where I'm in, you know, listening to Paul again. Like, I hear him say these words and I just say, dear God, I bet he got stoned right after he said these words, right? Because like, I mean, how could you not? Because I mean, these words are so, but what I notice and what I feel is that Paul is so serious on what he's going to say in a second in Colossians 3, which hopefully we'll be at next week, is that the truth of who you are is so different than you thought it was. And I'm trying to help you to see that it's as if everything you've been doing is complete nonsense compared to the truth, right? And it's like he's just trying to set up this massive dichotomy of like, all of that is rubbish. Of course it's not. And we would all say it's not rubbish, Paul. Like there's a lot of helpful stuff there, right? But like all that is rubbish compared to the truth and the fact that now you are the temple of God. The Spirit of God is within you. Like the power of that, like, we can even just feel that, but you just imagine how somebody could feel that there. But also just imagine, like, just to say it, like you had said earlier, like, let's be honest with ourselves and with others and say the whiplash, the difficulty that it would be to just imagine, like, this is the same as Malawi, just last story and then we're done. There's one particular lady, but this happens so many times in one of our programs, who absolutely, I may have mentioned an idea like this last time, but who was so convinced that she could do nothing. Like her value, her sense of self and her value was, I think, the lowest of anybody I've ever seen in my entire life. That she would kneel before you and she would just say, I'm just a worm. I'm just a worm. I can't do anything, etc. Yeah, it's really painful. It's really painful to witness. But like that was her state, right? Okay. She goes through one of our programs, and within the first month, she of course, because every week when we meet in our Village Savings Loans program, she hears something of the gospel, like something of the good news. And like the first like 10 weeks, because I put it together, they're words of affirmation, basically. They're words all of trying to give words of like, you are loved, Christ died for you, et cetera, et cetera. By the end of a month, she came to, with the trainer, she came to me and she said, like, I want to believe this. I just can't believe any of this. Like, there's no way that that's true for me, right? And she continued on like that for some time, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, after about a year because the program ended and she was in a whole different place, a completely different place. She, and this is where I say, I think this is what cultures are supposed to do. And this is what programs are supposed to do. And it's that through the program, she began to experience that she did have value and worth, because she was able to do, it was a savings program, and they give and they take care of the community. They do all sorts of things. So it allows you to begin to experience that not only do you have value, but part of your value is being able to share that value with other people, et cetera. So they kind of learned that through the program. By the time she got to the end, she was just 100% a different person, like completely, face bright, eyes bright. She the first thing I noticed when she came up to me, she didn't kneel. She did a very respectful, like you're supposed to do in Malawi, but she didn't get on the floor. She didn't kneel. She didn't say I'm a worm. She just said, thank you. This program has changed how I view myself. It's like that. And I don't say that saying anything about the program. I just say that, like, what I experienced with her was, this is wonderful news. But if you have been taught in so many ways that this is not true about you, you're not going to believe this, right? Or if you've been taught, just like a lot of our Jewish friends here, that your value and worth comes through something you do or some whatever, you're not going to believe this. And one, even if you want to believe it, it's going to have a really hard time setting in, right? And this is where I think, like, as we get to next week and whatnot, a lot of Paul's words of, this has already happened. This is already the truth about you. But now you've got to practice letting this in, right? You've got to practice putting off that old way of thinking and now put on the new way of thinking. And like literally right after this passage, that's what he says. It's like, therefore, because you now know that it's not on what you do and it's not your role and it's not your value in society, that's not why you're accepted. That's not why the Spirit is within you. Now our role is to accept, of course, like we said last week, accept that we are accepted in spite of feeling unacceptable. And now we practice putting off those thoughts and putting on the true thoughts about us, right? And I would say, like, for myself, it's to practice doing that for other people too, right? Because, like, for myself, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of built up judgments towards people. that when I was not being careful of like taking captive every thought, I have a lot of like, just to say it, I have a harder time extending this good news to some people than I do to other people, right? Just simply put. And so for me, it's been the exact same thing. It's been like a practice of putting off those old thoughts, those old way of thinking that I had towards that person, practice putting on the new thoughts. And that does not come like that. That takes 12 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, dear God, maybe 10 years. You know what I mean? But it's part of the practice. Anyway, sorry, I said a lot there. I know we're out of time, but any concluding thoughts from any of you or any?
You still keep up with the progress of this lady you talk about.
I do, because now she's one of our best trainers. Yeah, 100%. She's gold. Yeah, which is really wonderful.
And Ryan?
Yeah.
I wanted to say what I got from tonight's lesson is that one of the reasons it's hard to teach others or understand why they do believe such strange things is that we're threatening their identity.
Yeah.
So it's a really threat to them to suggest that possibly they could change or I could change.
Yeah, and you're right. 100%. That's really helpful.
You.
Yeah, thank you.
It occurs to me that what I'm hearing you say is that the Jewish people had basically made an idol out of the Torah. It was actually an object of worship. And I think that if you go to Israel and stand at the Western Wall and watch them with the Torah in their hand, it's that way with the Orthodox today. And the warning from me and all of that is that it's so easy for us to do the same thing.
You're right.
To codify and then worship that which was never intended as such.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. Thanks, Lenny. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to say, I really appreciate your class. I'm learning so much that's being helpful to me, at this time. Also, the stories of your experience that you've shared, really appreciate those because I'm able to connect being here in the Philippines. I'm able to kind of connect with you and kind of see where you're coming from. So I just want to say thank you, man.
Thank you, Ace. Really appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts from anyone here?
I just think that we have things that happen in our lives that are life changing, as I like to say, Saul Paul went through on the road to Damascus. It might not be that great, but there's something changes your life, whether it's the death of a person you dearly love, a child, it can make you be a better person. I mean, it's true that you turns bad things into good for you.
100%.
So, and I was just sitting here, one thing that really me is that I don't fear death. And it's because I saw my mother go to heaven. I experienced it, watched her eyes, and she had a grin, and she was seeing her mother, and I think Lord Jesus. That sounds a little Pentecostal, but
Sister.
48 hours before she died, I heard her in her room saying, and she had cancer, so she was in pain, and I heard her say, "Mama, Mama," and I thought, I walked in and I said, "Mama, are you seeing your mother?" And she said, "Yes." And she hadn't seen her. And of course, they'll tell you in hospice, and she was in home. They'll tell you they have a vision. So this is the way the world looks at it. But my mother was so happy, so pleasant, so, she finally reached the point she was in a coma, and I could witness a long time, so we won't do that. But my son released her through prayer, and she had been in a coma, terrific pain. This woman opened her eyes, looked at Craig, looked over at me, and grinned at Craig, grinned at me. And then I was over her face watching, and her eyes just backed up. But she left this world with full teeth showing what a bled, she was beside herself. So, do I look forward to death? No. I would like to see my grandchildren grow up and, be here as long as I can. I'd like to live until I am old and just die of old age naturally. I don't want to hurt. And I've experienced, I want it to be easy.
Piggy.
These instructions. But I know where I'm going. And it's something, if you are a Christian, it's great. Her death was very life affirming.
Yeah, that's great.
So it changed my little world. I didn't get to see my dad die. He was deceased before I could get there. And we weren't right there. It's real crazy, totally different type thing. But she witnessing her was just,
yeah.
And
Bless you.
I could go further,
bless
save that for another day.
Yeah, no, that's great. But that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And because 100% like that, your experience, but also Jesus, as Paul says it, the defeat of death like that is part of what is undoing all those thought systems that were built upon that. That was the last picture that I had there. We don't have to go through it, but if you knock out the first step of that pyramid, then the whole thing collapses. I think that's what you're saying as well, is like, once you know that that's no longer a problem, right? Everything else doesn't have to be a problem either, right? You can live with an enormous amount of freedom, right? And that's what Paul's going to tell us. So live with that freedom, be free to love, etc.
Well, she died when I was 53, and I've just had a really good time since.
That's great. That's a great example. Thanks for that. Well, let me just pray for us as we close here. So, Father, we're just so grateful for getting to read these texts. We're so grateful for each person who is here and on Zoom, and we're grateful for all the ways in which you are working in and through each person here, and through the words and the understanding and the lives that we get to see manifest presence of your goodness and your love and your freedom. And we ask that we would further grow in that and be like that this week, the next few days, as we do whatever it is that we're doing. Allow us to be exemplars of those who live free in the freedom to love that we have. And we thank you for that. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everyone. See you.